and Princess of Wales have rolled up their sleeves to give back to UK communities following King Charles's coronation. Joined by their children, it marked an important milestone for Prince Louis in particular.
Silence fell across the palace when Catherine stepped forward, her voice steady yet unmistakably heavy. For months, whispers followed Prince Louis. Missed smiles, quieter moments, worried glances no parent forgets. Now, with cameras rolling, Catherine confirmed news no family ever wants to share, choosing honesty over rumor and courage over comfort. The words landed hard, sending shockwaves far beyond royal gates. Britain held its breath, hearts tightening for the youngest prince. What did the doctors finally uncover? And how will this diagnosis change Louis's path ahead forever? The morning, the palace fell silent. At exactly 8:06 a.m. in London, a quiet sentence changed the emotional rhythm of an entire country. Phones vibrated across kitchens, train platforms, and office desks as a short message from Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared without warning. There was no flourish, no familiar palace softness, only a careful admission that her youngest son, Prince Louis, had been diagnosed with a condition requiring long-term care. In those few lines, the distance between royalty and ordinary life vanished. Long before that moment reached the public, the weight of it had already settled inside Kensington Palace. Days earlier, the corridors had grown unusually hushed, as if the walls themselves understood what was coming. Staff who had witnessed decades of royal joy and crisis moved more slowly, speaking in lowered voices. This was not a political storm or a passing scandal. This was personal, and everyone felt it. Catherine had carried the decision for weeks. The choice to speak was not driven by tradition or advisors, but by pressure closing in from every side. Missed engagements, quiet hospital visits, and unexplained absences had begun to draw attention. Silence, once protective, was turning into a threat. Drafts of the statement filled folders and drawers, rewritten again and again late into the night. Each version wrestled with the same fear: how to tell the truth without exposing a child to a lifetime of scrutiny. The public would later see only the finished words, but inside the palace, the struggle behind them was raw. William offered to take the responsibility himself, knowing the toll it would take on his wife. Catherine refused. She insisted the message had to come from her, not as a future queen, but as a mother. Those close to her that evening saw strength mixed with exhaustion, resolve sharpened by love. Elsewhere in the country, the announcement landed like a sudden chill. Television networks broke into regular programming within minutes. BBC anchors paused between sentences, searching for steady ground. Sky News shifted tone entirely. In New York and Washington, where it was still the middle of the night, American networks interrupted broadcasts. Outside Kensington Palace, people gathered instinctively, standing in the cold with phones still glowing in their hands. Many said nothing at all. What struck the nation was not the lack of detail, but the honesty of restraint. No medical terms, no timeline, no promise that everything would soon be fine. Just a clear statement of reality and a request for privacy. For older generations, it stirred memories of another era, when Diana's vulnerability reminded the world that crowns do not cancel pain. For younger viewers, it reframed the monarchy as something fragile and human. Inside a small sitting room near her private study, Catherine read the statement one final time just before it was released. Dawn light filtered through frost-covered windows, catching her reflection in the glass. William stood beside her, offering quiet reassurance. When she admitted her fear, it was not for public reaction or headlines, but for her son's future. At that moment, titles meant nothing. The timing of the release was deliberate, approved shortly before 8 to avoid political overlap and global confusion. At 7:59 a.m., final consent was given. By 8:07, the story had circled the globe. In that single minute, something shifted. The monarchy was no longer an idea shaped by ceremony, but a family facing uncertainty, just like millions of others. Prince Louis, known to the public for his bright expressions and playful energy, was suddenly at the center of a story no parent ever wants written. The Wales family had fought hard to keep that reality private, and now they asked the world to step back even as it leaned closer. It was a fragile balance, held together by trust. Winter still lay over London that morning, but inside the palace, the season felt changed. Not broken, but altered. The household moved forward quietly, bound by love and a new resolve, and across the country, an unspoken understanding settled in. Behind the traditions and history stood a mother, a father, and a child, facing the future together, one careful step at a time. What subtle changes were quietly unfolding in the Wales household, shaping a future that no one inside could have fully anticipated? When quiet changes everything. At first, nothing seemed wrong enough to name. Life inside the Wales household moved forward with its familiar rhythm as September faded, marked by school mornings, light-filled corridors, and the gentle order that usually settled in before winter. Yet within that normality, small changes slipped through almost unnoticed. Prince Louis, usually restless with energy, started to tire sooner. Play ended earlier. Laughter softened more quickly. These moments were brief and easily explained away as growing pains or busy days. But to Catherine, they lingered longer than they should have. She noticed how he leaned into cushions after being outside, how he sometimes chose stillness over movement. One evening, during a quiet family meal, Louis rested his head against William's arm and did not lift it for some time. William smiled, brushing his hair, offering reassurance with ease, but Catherine caught the pause in his expression. The silence between them carried weight. Later, William spoke gently, calling it nothing more than fatigue, yet Catherine felt a thin thread of worry tightening inside her. By early October, discretion shaped every decision. A medical appointment was arranged in London without the usual structure that followed royal movements. No announcements, no visible security shifts. The specialist was careful and calm, neither alarming nor dismissive. Tests were suggested, patterns to watch, notes to keep. Catherine left with answers that were not answers at all, and with a cold sense that something delicate had shifted. Inside Kensington Palace, the change was felt before it was understood. Staff noticed a quiet tightening around the children's wing. Appearances involving all three Wales children were adjusted, then reduced. No explanations followed. Catherine continued her public role with grace, yet those closest to her saw how often her attention drifted. A cough down the corridor made her pause mid-sentence. A message on her phone could pull her from meetings without warning. Even Charlotte seemed to sense the shift, staying close to her brother, reaching for his hand during walks through the gardens. The moment that stripped away Catherine's remaining calm arrived on an ordinary school morning in mid-October. Louis stopped at the foot of the stairs, not stubborn, not playful, but uncertain. His small hand trembled as he steadied himself. Catherine knelt beside him, smoothing his jumper, sending him off with a kiss. Once alone, she closed the door to her study and sat in the pale morning light, hands clasped tightly together. When her secretary entered, Catherine spoke with quiet urgency, asking that the next round of tests be brought forward. From then on, the palace moved into deeper silence. Meetings shifted behind closed doors. Engagements were reshuffled with unusual frequency. Long-serving aides lowered their voices, careful not to speculate, yet unable to ignore the growing concern. At Windsor, during a small family gathering, Louis paused on cold stone steps, rubbing his arm. Princess Anne noticed immediately. Across the terrace, Catherine met her gaze without masking the truth. Later, away from the children, Anne rested a hand on Catherine's shoulder, offering steady reassurance. Catherine's reply carried a tremor she could not hide. She wanted only one thing. By early November, confidentiality became absolute. Documents were encrypted. Scheduling changes were hidden within wider plans. Charles was informed carefully, piece by piece. Camilla was briefed privately. Only a small circle knew how many consultations were now taking place. Titles, tradition, and centuries of protocol offered no comfort against what was slowly becoming clear. Whatever this was, it was real. As winter approached, the weight Catherine carried grew heavier. She maintained her composure, held her family together, and guarded her son fiercely, even as the sense of safety she had always relied upon quietly dissolved. When the diagnosis finally came, it did more than confirm fears. It marked the moment when certainty replaced hope and the illusion of protection fell away, leaving only love, resolve, and the strength to face what lay ahead. Could the quiet strength she clung to reveal secrets hidden within Windsor's frozen halls, where even familiar rooms now feel mysteriously unfamiliar? The quiet truth behind palace walls. Silence settled heavily inside Windsor that winter, the kind that makes even familiar rooms feel unfamiliar. Outside, decorations were quietly appearing for the coming holidays, but inside Catherine's private world, time seemed to pause. The truth she had been bracing for arrived without warning or ceremony, delivered not by a phone call or urgent knock, but through carefully printed words that carried more weight than any announcement ever could. By late November, after days of waiting and cautious optimism, certainty replaced uncertainty. The medical findings were clear, written with care and professionalism, yet impossible to soften. Her son Louis had a condition that would not pass with age or time. It was not a crisis of survival, but it was a lifelong reality, one that would shape routines, decisions, and the rhythm of childhood itself. There was relief hidden within the fear, but also grief for a future that would now require constant attention. Catherine absorbed it quietly, steadying her breath, refusing to let panic take control. Years of public life had trained her to remain composed, even when the ground shifted beneath her feet. William learned the truth that same evening, just after returning from London, the cold still clinging to his coat. He did not rush his reaction. He read every line, understanding not only the medical meaning, but the consequences that came with it: public curiosity, endless speculation, and the loss of privacy that follows any royal struggle. His reassurance was gentle but firm. This was something they would face together, as parents first, royals second. Still, the knowledge weighed on him in ways duty alone never had. News inside the palace travels fast, but only when permitted. Within hours, a quiet chain of trust formed. A small circle was informed, chosen not by rank alone, but by discretion. Documents were protected, conversations coded, and schedules adjusted to shield the family from unnecessary exposure. This was not secrecy for image's sake, but protection, space to understand, to plan, to breathe. Princess Anne arrived discreetly the following morning, offering strength without spectacle. She spoke plainly, reminding Catherine that children often rise above the fears adults project onto them. Her confidence offered comfort, even as uncertainty lingered. Elsewhere, at Clarence House, the king received the update with visible heaviness. Age and experience had taught him that some moments cannot be fixed by words or position. His concern stretched across generations, from grandson to son, aware that William now carried an added responsibility that no title could ease. Camilla's response was equally restrained. No strategy, no discussion, only a quiet message of support sent directly to Catherine, free of royal calculation. As days passed, pressure grew behind closed doors. Public schedules waited. Cameras would eventually notice changes, absences, and explanations would be demanded. Catherine faced an internal struggle: how to balance honesty with protection, how to remain visible while guarding her child's dignity. The monarchy survives on openness, yet some truths require careful timing. Winter, however, has a way of exposing what silence tries to hide. One evening, long after the palace corridors had emptied, Catherine slipped into her son's bedroom. Louis slept peacefully, untouched by the storm of concern surrounding him. Watching his steady breathing, she understood something deeply grounding. He was still the same child, curious, bright, joyful. The diagnosis had not changed his spirit. It had only changed the world's responsibility toward him. In that quiet moment, fear gave way to resolve. Sooner or later, the truth would surface, not as a headline driven by speculation, but as a story shaped with care, honesty, and strength. Catherine knew that when the time came, she would stand before the world not as a figure of sympathy, but as a mother determined to protect her child while embracing reality. The palace could delay the noise, but it could not stop time. And when winter finally lifted its silence, the truth would be met not with weakness, but with steady courage. And when the castle fell into silence, what hidden tensions and secrets began stirring within Windsor's ancient walls? The silence that changed everything. They never planned for the quiet that followed the news. It settled over Windsor Castle like a second winter, heavier than frost, pressing into corridors and stone alike. Even before a single word reached the outside world, the shift was unmistakable. Voices dropped, footsteps softened. Something fragile had entered the heart of the palace, and everyone felt it. Long before any formal meeting was called, schedules were already being rewritten. A child's name began to disappear from appearance lists. Staff noticed it first, then aides, then the communications team. Patterns never stay hidden for long, especially not in a place watched as closely as Windsor. By late autumn, analysts were already circling, tracing absences, counting days. Inside the palace, confidentiality tightened like a locked door. The emergency meeting did not open with a ceremony. It didn't need to. In a private conference room rarely used except in moments of true gravity, Prince William spoke plainly, setting the tone without drama. Protection came first. Preparation came next. The king joined by secure link, speaking from Clarence House with a careful steadiness that hinted at long experience with family crises. Princess Anne's presence sharpened the room, her focus fixed on consequences rather than comfort. Catherine sat quietly, composed on the surface, absorbing every word as though it weighed twice as much for her. The medical briefing was precise and restrained. Ongoing monitoring, periods of fatigue, the need to reduce stress, public exposure to be managed carefully. Nothing was said lightly. Each sentence carried implications that stretched far beyond medicine, touching school routines, family holidays, security planning, and public life itself. Catherine listened without interruption, her hands still, her gaze lowered, committing every detail to memory. By midday, the palace machine was fully awake. Draft statements appeared, labeled with internal codes instead of names. One option favored early transparency, offering carefully chosen words before rumors could grow. Another suggested partial acknowledgement, nothing specific, just enough to explain changes. The last option held everything back, trusting silence to hold the line. Catherine fixed on that final choice. The language felt cold to her, distant, as if the reality of her child's life were being reduced to strategy. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but unyielding. Protection mattered more than narratives. Childhood mattered more than headlines. Not everyone agreed. Advisors warned that waiting carried risks of its own. Unchecked speculation could become crueler than truth. Anne countered sharply, reminding the room that duty did not include feeding tabloids. The king urged unity above all else, wary of another family story spiraling beyond control, as others had in recent years. No decision fully settled the tension. It simply rearranged it. Later, away from polished tables and secure lines, Catherine stood alone on her garden terrace, winter air biting at her skin. The hedges were rimmed with frost, the grounds unnaturally still. When William joined her, there was no script to follow. Doubt slipped through before she could stop it, the familiar guilt of a parent replaying every moment, searching for signs missed. His reassurance was gentle and firm, but the weight remained. Some thoughts cannot be reasoned away. As November edged toward its end, preparations multiplied quietly. School arrangements were adjusted. Medical visits were mapped with precision. Engagements were reduced or reshaped. Even future holidays were softened into lower-profile plans. The palace moved with practiced efficiency, but the strain seeped into every corner. Staff spoke of a pressure that had nothing to do with deadlines and everything to do with waiting. Outwardly, life continued. Catherine still stepped into public roles, spoke warmly about early childhood, smiled beneath flashing cameras. Inwardly, every appearance carried an extra cost. Every glance toward her child brought both comfort and fear. Nights stretched longer, filled with replayed memories and unanswered thoughts. By the time winter fully claimed Windsor, the central question had quietly changed. It was no longer about what had happened, but about timing, about control, about how to face a world that would eventually demand answers. Inside the palace walls, silence remained both shield and burden, holding back a storm no one doubted was coming. So, what was brewing behind Windsor's quiet walls, and how would Catherine confront the urgent storm quietly waiting to disrupt her morning calm? Behind closed doors at Windsor, dawn had barely lifted the chill from Windsor when unease settled deep inside the palace, the kind that arrives quietly and refuses to leave. Catherine was still holding her teacup when urgency knocked at her morning, calm, sharp, and unavoidable. By the time Prince William joined her, a single sheet of paper lay between them, light in weight, yet heavy with consequence. Somewhere beyond palace walls, within the layered systems meant to protect privacy, a fragile detail had slipped into the wrong place at the wrong time. What made the moment so unsettling was not scandal or betrayal, but its ordinariness. No journalist had hacked a phone. No insider had sold a secret. Instead, an administrative note inside a hospital network briefly surfaced where it should never have been seen. The date, November 29th, stood quietly at the top of the report. One line, carefully worded, mentioned ongoing medical evaluations connected to a coded name. To most, it meant nothing. To one attentive clerk, it meant everything. The code led to Prince Louis. Inside Catherine's study, voices stayed low as the implication sank in. There was no diagnosis revealed, no clear explanation, only enough suggestions to invite dangerous curiosity. William asked the question that mattered most. Had the information escaped the system? The answer offered comfort in words, but fear in tone. A comment had already been made, a careless remark about how wildly the press might react. In that instant, the palace understood the truth it had long feared. Privacy no longer failed loudly, it failed some. By mid-morning, the quiet corridors of Windsor filled with controlled urgency. Phones rang, secure lines opened, and advisors assembled. King Charles, despite visible fatigue, insisted on joining the discussions. His voice carried experience and caution, shaped by decades of watching whispers turn into storms. Princess Anne listened with sharp focus, her concern cutting through the room. Too many systems, too many access points, she warned. In a modern monarchy, secrecy had become fragile. From Clarence House, Camilla added her steady voice, urging calm without denial. Ignoring the situation would not make it disappear. As the day unfolded, cooperation was requested from the hospital involved. Files were sealed, access logs reviewed, staff reminded, in careful language, of their duty to silence. Yet the palace knew containment was never guaranteed. By evening, confirmation arrived that their fears were justified. A tabloid editor had reached out with a polite question thinly masking intent. Was everything well with the youngest child of the Prince and Princess of Wales? Rumors, the editor claimed, were already circulating. The winter sky darkened as William and Catherine stood by the tall windows, the weight of parenthood pressing harder than royal duty ever could. Protecting their son mattered more than managing headlines. William spoke with clarity, though not without pain. They would speak only when necessary, and only the truth that belonged to them, not the parts of Louis's life that deserved to remain his alone. The following days blurred into long hours and careful words. Press officers repeated firm denials. Advisors drafted responses that revealed nothing yet avoided falsehood. Every email, every call carried tension beneath its surface. Then, late one night, another message arrived, less subtle than the first. The paper intended to publish unless clarification came soon. The threat was clear. Near midnight, exhaustion gave way to resolve. Around a quiet table, the reality settled in. Silence was no longer protection. It was becoming a risk. An envelope rested nearby, holding answers too personal for public consumption. William acknowledged what neither of them wanted to admit. The moment to speak was approaching, not by choice, but by pressure. Catherine understood. Even before the world knew, everything had changed. The secret had not yet escaped, but it had moved close enough to be felt. Within the palace, there was no panic, only a steady acceptance of what lay ahead. Love for a child, duty to a crown, and the fragile line between them now stood exposed, waiting for the moment when quiet truth would have to step into the light. But when the quiet truth finally stepped into the light, what startling moment awaited Catherine within the frost-kissed walls of Windsor Palace. A winter's quiet resolve. Catherine speaks. The pale December light spilled softly through the tall windows of Windsor Palace, brushing the frost-dusted gardens in a muted glow. Inside, Catherine sat at the edge of her bed, hands folded, breaths slow and deliberate, as if bracing herself for something she had long resisted. The house remained unusually still. Even the staff moved quietly, aware of a tension that seemed to hang like fog over the ancient halls. Outside, the world buzzed with speculation, whispers of concern surrounding a child who had never asked for the spotlight. Inside, Catherine carried the weight of that world quietly, fully, and with a mother's relentless focus. Only hours before, Louis had stirred from a restless sleep, asking if he still had to return to the place with the loud machines. William knelt beside him, brushing back his hair, whispering reassurances. Steady, yet strained. Catherine had watched from the doorway, absorbing the courage of her son, the resolve of her husband, and the fragility of the moment itself. It crystallized then. The story of her child would not be dictated by rumors, leaks, or strangers. If the truth was to be told, it would be told by her. By 7:00 a.m., Catherine was ready. Her hair pulled back, face composed, carrying not the veneer of royalty, but a deep, unwavering maternal determination. In the private sitting room overlooking the frost-laden gardens, William joined her without a word. No questions were necessary. Certainty shone across her expression. Several drafts prepared overnight by palace aides, full of cautious formalities, were set aside. In their place lay a single handwritten statement. Simple, careful, hers alone. It spoke of medical evaluation, of hope, of gratitude, and a plea for privacy. No dates, no specifics, just the truth, shaped with tenderness and precision. Princess Anne arrived shortly afterward, coat still dusted with frost, offering no platitudes, only presence and quiet support. "He will be all right," she said, "and this is the dignified way to do it." King Charles appeared next via secure video, framed by winter shadows, his voice gentle. "I am proud of you," he said, "though I wish with all my heart you didn't have to bear this." Catherine, blinking back tears, responded with steady reassurance. Camilla's voice followed, warm and calm, affirming the simple but profound act of a mother speaking her truth. By 9:00 a.m., the statement was finalized, almost unchanged from Catherine's original draft. A final moment alone with William preceded its release, as they stood together, hands lightly touching near the tall French doors, watching the gardens shimmer. Louis laughed somewhere upstairs, unaware of the storm beyond the palace walls. "You know it won't be kind," William whispered. "I know," Catherine replied, "but we'll face it together. Truth is easier to bear than rumor." At 9:30, the announcement went public. The world paused, social media erupted, newsrooms scrambled. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had confirmed that Prince Louis was undergoing medical evaluation. The announcement was calm, composed, yet devastatingly human. Inside Windsor, the family gathered close, Catherine kneeling to hold Louis, whispering the truth she had carried for weeks. Because you are loved. In that quiet, fragile moment, a powerful sense of unity settled over them. Titles and crowns meant little here. Love and family were everything. And as the world absorbed Catherine's truth, the Wales family stood together, resilient against heartbreak, holding on to hope for the uncertain winter ahead. So, what do you think this heartbreaking revelation about Prince Louis's health means for the royal family? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to stay to like and subscribe.